Oh, well, my father clearly drinks a lot because he has borderline personality disorder because he was abused by his father, but...
This is not your fault. Look at me, son. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
I know.
No, you don't. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
All right.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault.
Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean. Not you.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Oh my God.
In reference to the scene in Good Will Hunting, where the emotional peak of the story is the counsellor played by Robin Williams comforting the character played by Matt Damon, the guy who was abused by his adoptive father, and saying it's not your fault, it's not your fault. Why do victims feel guilt? Three things, I guess. One thing is there's a kind of twisted logic that occurs where the victim works it around so that inside of their head they make it their own fault. Secondly is that they're angry with themselves and upset, and you're never angrier than when you're angry with yourself, that they didn't do anything to prevent the abuse from occurring. And thirdly, you need to understand the concept of toxic shame. There's some types of people in the world that's like a fruit. Like if you squeeze an orange, what comes out the orange is orange juice. And some people, if you squeeze them in different ways, i.e. they're under pressure, what comes out of them is whatever is inside of them. So guilty people will feel guilty under pressure, happy people will feel happy under pressure, depressed people will feel depressed under pressure. So there is this element here where if that's what you're primed for, that's what you're going to feel. I talk about toxic shame a lot, and I felt such overwhelmingly strong toxic shame from what I'd experienced in childhood that by the time I was a teenager, I had really quite serious symptoms of avoidant personality disorder and extreme social anxiety, to the point where walking down the street and going into a shop and buying some milk was an ordeal. It was incredibly stressful. My problem for me wasn't that I really thought that the people around me were bad, or they were going to hurt me or judge me, which can be what causes people to feel social anxiety and elements of avoidant personality disorder. It was that I felt that I was repellent and that my presence there could corrupt or hurt or disease people. Even to this day, intimacy at times can be a bit difficult for me. If I'm asleep, I generally don't like to be in contact with the person I'm sleeping with because I'm afraid I'll injure them, which I think is a leftover from that. There must be something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me. It's like a mantra playing in the background all the time inside of people's heads, inside of people's hearts when they've been abused. So they're ready to feel guilty at the drop of a hat. I would say 80 to 90% of the clients that I speak to are suffering from elements of toxic shame, and it's very easy to make them feel guilt and make them feel shame. So during sessions, I will jokingly do that with them in a light-hearted, humorous way, show them how unrealistic, dramatic and silly some of these patterns of thought are, and I've experienced them as well, where you just feel like you're an awful person. It just reminded me of a few things. I'm going to go a little bit religious for a second. There's a dog upon the floor and he's rolling around. One of them was I met a Silat instructor in the UK, very, very good Silat instructor, and he told me his Silat instructor in Malaysia was so devout that he didn't pray 5 times a day, he prayed all day, every day, continuously, and that he always had the mantra running in his heart, there is no God but the one true God, etc., etc. That would run the whole time. That to me sounds like a good idea. That sounds like a lofty ideal, because a lot of us are running a thought, a root core belief that just plays like a circle in our hearts and our minds of there must be something wrong with me. I'm intrinsically a bad person or a shitty person or not worth knowing, that kind of thing. The other thing that reminded me to go religious again is from the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus apparently said, let me see if I can get this right. If you bring forth what is within you will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you. That's some deep shizzle right there, homies. That's worth a few days reflection. Just sticking with that for a few days, you'll get a lot from that. So where does this guilt come from? Well, the guilt is in you. It was brainwashed into you. You now have a colonizing force that runs inside of your heart and inside of your mind that is telling you you're a bad person. So you're ready to just feel guilty at the drop of a hat anyway. You're primed for guilt. The other issue here, when you're young, you lack ego boundaries. As you grow up, if you grow up in a nurturing, supportive, loving environment, you should grow healthy ego boundaries such that by the time you're 13, 14 years old, you're your own person and you can say no. You learn to say no. You learn to be able to say non-serviam, thanks. All of you who are watching this need to learn how to say no, and you also need to learn how to say inside of your own mind non-serviam, and you also need to learn how to say to people no means no. Because some of you get asked to do something and you say no, and then the person asking you says it again and again and again, and eventually they wear you down and then you just say yes just to get them to stop asking. Learning how to say no is useful, but a nice little martial arts psychology technique that I can give you is this is how you're going to flip your opponent on their back, as it were, is you're going to say, I just told you no, no means no, please don't ask me again. Now, a normal healthy person can do that. The ego boundaries should grow strong, there'll be no holes, the ego boundaries won't be malformed or deformed by twisted injunctions, and they'll be fine. But for the rest of us, those of us who are carrying the complex PTSD, we don't have that, so we have to relearn it from scratch. When you're a kid, you don't even have ego boundaries to begin with, and you can't challenge your mum or your dad. You don't have the ability, the intellectual capacity to say, oh, well, my father clearly drinks a lot because he has borderline personality disorder because he was abused by his father, but you can't do that. Daddy is just daddy, and mummy is just mummy, and they're gods in your world. In the film The Crow with Brandon Lee, Bruce Lee's son, there's a line in it, it's quite a nice little line, mother is the name of God on the lips of children. You know, there's a godlike power that they have, especially when we are very young. But when we're very young, we're as hypnotizable as you are at any other time in your life. Your mind is just like warm clay, it's ready to be molded, and you won't refuse any injunctions. If you're put in a context where the meta communication is, you're worthless, you're a burden, you're annoying, you take my time, I don't love you, I hate you, then you're gonna grow up with these porous ego boundaries and the feeling that there's something wrong with me, there must be something wrong with me. So why do survivors of any kind of abuse feel guilt? They end up blaming themselves because the mind says, I can't blame my father because he's perfect. I know that he definitely loved me. He must have loved me. That's an essential core truth, is he must have loved me. So therefore, when he beat me, it must have been because I'd done something wrong. You lack then the ability to logically and accurately say, hey, this guy's a fucking asshole, because you're a kid and you live in an environment where you depend on these people for your very survival. You don't know anything else. You don't know there's any options. You don't have any options. You can't just go,
well, I'm gonna go and use my credit card now and stay in a hotel away from you dicks.
So you just have to fucking stay there. That's where the complex PTSD comes in, because you're effectively imprisoned in your own house in that abusive environment. Then there is this thing that I mentioned before where you will hate yourself for not being able to protect yourself and for allowing it to happen and not being able to do anything about it. The blame goes back onto you again. We do this because we are trained to do it. We do this, we put the blame back on ourselves and shame ourselves and guilt ourselves because we were trained as children that that was the right way to do it. It's never mummy and daddy's fault. It is always your fault because you're a horrible little blah, blah, whatever it is. And you can't refuse that. So you just end up living with it. So that's why the victims of abuse can end up feeling guilty and blaming themselves And that's why, you know, sometimes when I'm coaching people, it's useful and pertinent for me to remind them and just say, hey, you know, this isn't your fault, right? And they'll go, yeah, no, it's not my fault, just like in the movie, da 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 da. But I know that they're carrying a message in the unconscious that says it is their fault, because there must be something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me, right? If that resonates with you and you've got that running inside of your head, then you might need to get rid of that. These are the kinds of narcissistically abusive patterns of behavior that play out in childhood. These are the things that are necessary in order to prime you for narcissistic abuse in adulthood. Because a person who is not sovereign, who is not independent, who is a codependent waiting to hook onto an abusive personality type, who is suffering from the people pleaser syndrome, will not see a narcissist or an abusive toxic personality the way other people do. People with good boundaries, sovereign individuals, see somebody who's abusive and they don't even take them seriously. They're just like, fuck you, mate. Get the fuck out of my face. And if they're in a relationship with them, the first time that person tries anything on, they kick them out. You say, why'd you kick him out? Oh, the guy's a dick. And they don't analyse it any further. So, there you go. I guess that's that for that. If you can learn to do something, then you can fucking unlearn to do it. Can't you, Max?